The scent of stale cardboard and faded memories hangs heavy in the air of what was once Leo Martinez's bedroom. For his mother, Maria, this room is a mausoleum of hope, a carefully preserved time capsule from 2012. Every poster on the wall, every textbook on the desk, remains exactly where her 20-year-old son left it. She runs a hand over the worn fabric of his favorite university sweatshirt, the Eagle Creek Beavers logo now cracked with age. It's a ritual she has performed nearly every day for 13 years, a silent prayer to a ghost. The silence in this house is a living thing, a constant, suffocating reminder of the vibrant life that was extinguished on a cold, rainy Oregon night. Leo Martinez was the embodiment of the American dream his parents had chased from Mexico. He was a sophomore at Eagle Creek University, majoring in graphic design. His future as bright and promising as the digital art he created on his computer. To make ends meet and ease the burden on his family, he worked part-time delivering for a local joint, Pioneer Pizza. He was responsible, kind, and his smile was a beacon of warmth that could cut through the gloomiest of Pacific Northwest days. His friends knew him as the dependable one, the guy who would drive you to the airport at 4 a.m. without a second thought. Nobody, not a single soul in his orbit, could have imagined he was driving toward a void from which he would never return. Night of October 26, 2012, began like any other Friday. Rain lashed against the windows of the small apartment Leo shared with his roommate, Josh. The air was filled with the sounds of a flickering television and the steady hum of the old refrigerator. Leo was getting ready for his shift, pulling on his waterproof jacket and lacing up his worn-out boots. Just a couple more hours of slinging dough and then I'm done for the weekend, he had told Josh, a casual remark that would later echo with chilling finality. He grabbed his keys, shouted a quick goodbye, and walked out the door. The smell of rain and wet asphalt instantly replacing the warmth of the apartment. Maria Martinez remembers their last phone call with painful clarity. It was just before his shift started, a routine check-in that she insisted on. They spoke of her work at the local clinic, of his upcoming midterms. He sounded happy, maybe a little tired, but completely normal. "I love you, mijo," she said, the words that would become her final gift to him. "Love you too, ma," he replied, the sound of the pizzeria's busy kitchen buzzing in the background. The call lasted no more than 3 minutes, a fleeting moment of connection that Maria would replay in her mind a million times over, searching for any hint of fear, any shadow of what was to come. At Pioneer Pizza, the Friday night rush was in full swing. The air was thick with the smell of baking dough, melted cheese, and spicy pepperoni. The ovens roared, phones rang incessantly, and the small team worked in a chaotic but practiced rhythm. Leo was a familiar and welcome presence, known for his efficiency and his calm demeanor under pressure. His manager, a burly man named Sal, handed him his last delivery of the night around 9:45 p.m. It was an address in the more remote, wooded outskirts of Eagle Creek, a place where the streetlights grew sparse and the dense Oregon forest pressed in on the narrow roads. The order was simple: 1 large pepperoni and a 2-liter bottle of soda. The delivery address was a house on a secluded road known as Aspen Ridge Lane, about a 15-minute drive from the pizzeria. Leo placed the insulated bag in the passenger seat of his beat-up 1998 sedan, the engine rumbling to life with a familiar cough. He pulled out of the brightly lit parking lot, his step disappearing into the sheets of rain that swept across the town. This was the last confirmed sighting of Leo Martinez, a fleeting image captured by the pizzeria's grainy security camera. A final wave to a coworker before driving into oblivion. Back at the apartment, Josh started to worry around 11:30 p.m. Leo was always prompt, always back by 11 at the latest. He'd text if he was running late, a simple "on my way" or "stuck at work." But tonight, his phone went straight to voicemail. Josh paced the small living room, the television now a meaningless drone in the background. He tried calling again and again, the unanswered rings amplifying his growing anxiety. The rain outside seemed to mock him, each drop a tiny tick of a clock that was moving too fast and not at all. By 1 a.m. The anxiety had curdled into genuine fear. Josh called Maria, his voice trembling as he tried to explain that Leo was missing. Maria's world tilted on its axis. Sleep was a forgotten luxury as she and her husband, Hector, immediately began their own frantic search. They called hospitals, the local police department, every friend of Leo's they could think of. The initial response from the police was, measured, suggesting he was a young man who might have just decided to blow off some steam. But Maria knew her son. This wasn't him. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. The cold dread that settled in her stomach that night would become her constant companion for the next 13 years. Detective Miller, a seasoned officer with the Eagle Creek Police Department, got the official missing person report the next morning. At first, it seemed like a standard case. A college kid. Maybe he went to a party after work. Maybe his phone died. But as the hours stretched into a day, and then two, Miller's gut told him this was different. Leo's bank accounts were untouched. His social media was silent. He had simply vanished, as if the rain-soaked road had swallowed him whole, leaving behind only the deafening silence of his absence. The initial investigation focused on Leo's route, his last known destination, but the threads of his final moments were already frayed, washed away by the relentless storm. Friends and family were questioned, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and terror. A palpable sense of wrongness descended upon the small university town. A young man, full of life and promise, had been erased from existence while doing something as mundane as delivering a pizza. The mystery of what happened on Aspen Ridge Lane was just beginning, a dark puzzle with a crucial piece that wouldn't surface for another 13 years. The first 24 hours are the most critical in any missing person case, a fact that weighed heavily on Detective Miller's mind. He mobilized search parties, coordinating with local volunteers and university security. They combed the dense, dripping forests that bordered the town, their bright raincoats stark against the deep greens and browns of the Oregon wilderness. The air was damp and smelled of pine and wet earth, a scent that would forever be linked to the frustrating first days of the search. Each snapped twig, each rustle of leaves, brought a jolt of adrenaline that quickly fizzled into disappointment. Leo Martinez was nowhere to be found. Maria and Hector Martinez existed in a state of suspended animation, a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. Their home became the unofficial headquarters for the search, a constant flurry of worried friends, concerned neighbors, and the grim-faced detective. The coffee pot was always on, but no one seemed to eat. Maria clutched a framed photo of Leo, his wide smile a cruel mockery of their current agony. "He's a good boy," she would repeat to Detective Miller, her voice hoarse with unshed tears. "He would never just run away. Someone has him. Someone took my boy." Detective Miller's focus narrowed on the delivery itself. The customer who placed the order was a man named Dale Hendricks. He lived at the address on Aspen Ridge Lane, a small, somewhat run-down rental house at the very end of the gravel road. When first questioned, Dale was cooperative, almost nonchalant. He told officers that he'd waited until about 10:30 p.m. before giving up and eating a frozen dinner instead. He claimed the pizza boy, Leo, had never arrived. "I just figured the kid got lost or the order was cancelled because of the storm," he said, shrugging. "It happens." His calmness felt unnatural, a red flag that Miller mentally noted. The timeline was everything. Sal, the manager at Pioneer Pizza, confirmed Leo left at 9:45 p.m. The drive to Aspen Ridge Lane should have taken no more than 15 to 20 minutes, even in the heavy rain. This placed Leo in the vicinity of Dale Hendricks's house around 10:05 p.m., yet Dale insisted he never showed. The 40-minute gap between Leo's estimated arrival and Dale's claim of giving up was a black hole. What happened in that window of time? Did Leo even make it to the secluded road? The questions piled up, each one a brick in the wall of uncertainty that was rising around the case. On the third day of the search, a breakthrough came, though it was a grim one. A call came in from the county sheriff's department. A patrol car had spotted a vehicle matching the description of Leo's 1998 sedan. It was parked haphazardly on a logging access road about 5 miles from Aspen Ridge Lane, partially obscured by a thicket of overgrown blackberry bushes. The location was remote, a place you wouldn't just stumble upon. It had to have been driven there intentionally. Detective Miller felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach as he raced to the scene. The car was an eerie sight. It was empty, the driver's side door slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. The keys were still in the ignition. Rainwater had pooled on the floor mats, and the air inside was cold and musty. The pizza bag was on the passenger seat, but the pizza itself was gone. The 2-liter bottle of soda, however, was still there. Sitting on the floor, it was an unsettling detail. Why take the pizza, but leave the drink? It didn't fit the pattern of a simple robbery. The forensics team descended on the vehicle, their methodical work a stark contrast to the chaotic nature of the scene. They dusted for fingerprints, collected fibers, and swabbed every surface for DNA. Detective Miller watched, his gaze scanning the surrounding woods. The silence here was different from the silence in Leo's bedroom. It was heavy, ancient, and felt like it was hiding a terrible secret. There were no obvious signs of a struggle inside or outside the car. No blood, no broken glass. Just the quiet stillness of an abandoned object. The discovery of the car both narrowed and widened the investigation. It confirmed that Leo had been in this remote area, far from his intended delivery route, but it raised more questions than it answered. Did he drive here himself? If so, why? Or was he forced to drive here by someone else, who then took him from the vehicle? The team worked late into the evening, the harsh glare of their portable lights cutting through the twilight, casting long, dancing shadows among the towering Douglas firs. Back in the interview room, Dale Hendricks was questioned again. When told about the car's location, he showed no surprise, his demeanor remaining placid. He maintained his story. The pizza never came. He offered a DNA sample and fingerprints willingly, confident they wouldn't find anything to connect him to the vehicle. He had an alibi of sorts. He was on the phone with his sister from 10:40 p.m. until after 11 p.m. It was a small window of opportunity, but his sister confirmed the call, leaving Miller with a frustratingly plausible, if not entirely convincing, alibi. The processing of the car yielded almost nothing of value. A few smudged, unidentifiable fingerprints on the outside and inside. Only prints belonging to Leo and his roommate Josh. The lack of evidence was, in itself, evidence of something sinister. It suggested a careful perpetrator, someone who knew what they were doing. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, the hope of finding Leo alive began to wane, replaced by the grim reality that they were now likely searching not for a missing person, but for a body. The abandoned car on the lonely logging road was the last breadcrumb, and the trail had officially gone cold. With the discovery of Leo's car, the investigation pivoted, its full attention now laser-focused on the man who made the final order, Dale Hendricks. At 42, Dale was a relative newcomer to Eagle Creek, having moved to the area 2 years prior. He was a self-employed handyman, taking odd jobs around the county. He lived alone, and neighbors described him as quiet, reclusive, and occasionally unsettling. He kept to himself, and the unkempt state of his rental property on Aspen Ridge Lane suggested a man who didn't much care for appearances or company. He was a ghost long before Leo became one. Detective Miller pulled Dale's record. It wasn't clean, but it wasn't monstrous either. A few minor offenses dotted his past: a DUI in his 20s, a petty theft charge that was later dismissed, and an assault charge from 5 years ago in another state, stemming from a bar fight. There was nothing to suggest a propensity for kidnapping or murder, yet Miller couldn't shake the feeling that Dale was hiding something. His story was too neat, his composure too absolute for a man whose pizza delivery boy had vanished into thin air, launching a massive police investigation that started on his doorstep. The interview room felt smaller with Dale Hendricks in it. He sat across from Detective Miller, his hands resting calmly on the metal table. He had a way of looking at you, a flat, affectless gaze that seemed to absorb light and give nothing back. Miller pressed him on the details of that night. "You're sure you didn't hear a car approach? Aspen Ridge Lane isn't exactly a highway, Dale. You'd hear a vehicle coming up that gravel road." Dale just shrugged, a slight, dismissive movement of his shoulders. "It was storming pretty bad, Detective. Wind, rain. I had the TV on. I didn't hear a thing." The forensics report on Leo's car came back, confirming the unsettling lack of evidence. It was wiped clean of any foreign prints, a detail that screamed premeditation. A random carjacker or robber would likely be messy, leaving behind a trace of their presence. The clean car suggested an offender who was methodical and forensically aware. This profile didn't seem to fit the picture of Dale Hendricks, the sloppy handyman with a record of impulsive, minor crimes. The contradiction was baffling, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit, despite the lack of direct evidence. Miller secured a warrant to search Dale's property. The house was cluttered and dusty, a chaotic maze of old newspapers, tools, and unwashed dishes. The air was stale, smelling of cigarettes and fried food. The search team spent hours meticulously going through every room, every drawer, the garage, and the small, muddy yard behind the house. They were looking for anything: a pizza box, a sign of a struggle, a weapon, or any of Leo's belongings. The search was exhaustive, turning the already messy house upside down. In the back of Dale's rusted pickup truck, under a pile of dirty tarps, they found a set of tire chains. This was mildly interesting, as the chains could be used to gain traction on muddy logging roads, like the one where Leo's car was found. However, owning tire chains in rural Oregon was hardly unusual, and Dale claimed he hadn't used them in years. It was a potential link, but a weak one, purely circumstantial. The search of the house itself yielded absolutely nothing connecting him to Leo Martinez. The pizza, it seemed, had never crossed his threshold. The emotional toll on the Martinez family was becoming unbearable. Each day without news was a fresh wave of grief. They held a press conference, their faces pale and drawn, pleading for any information. "If you have my son, please just let him go," Hector Martinez begged, his voice breaking. "He's a good kid. He wouldn't hurt anyone. We just want him home." The community rallied around them, holding vigils and plastering missing posters with Leo's smiling face all over town. But the posters soon became faded and Rain Street, blending into the scenery like old advertisements. Frustrated, Miller decided to re-interview the other drivers at Pioneer Pizza. He wanted to know if anyone had ever had a strange experience delivering to Aspen Ridge Lane, or specifically to Dale Hendricks. One driver, a young woman named Sarah, recalled delivering to Dale a few months prior. She described him as creepy, saying he stared at her a little too long and made her feel uncomfortable. "I just had a bad vibe," she said. "After that, I asked Sal not to give me any more deliveries up that way." It wasn't evidence, but it added another layer of suspicion to the reclusive handyman. The physical search for Leo was eventually scaled back. The forest was too vast, the resources too limited. Without new leads, the case began to lose momentum. The media attention faded, moving on to the next tragedy. For Detective Miller, the case became a personal obsession, a file that he kept on the corner of his desk long after it was officially declared a cold case. He would stare at Leo's photo, the hopeful eyes of a young man on the cusp of his future, and feel the bitter sting of failure. He had a prime person of interest in Dale Hendricks, but not a shred of physical evidence to link him to the crime. In a final, almost desperate interview, Miller confronted Dale with the driver's discomfort and his neighbor's descriptions. For the first time, Dale's composure cracked, but not with guilt, with anger. "So I'm a little weird. So what? This town is full of weirdos. It doesn't make me a killer," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "I told you, I didn't see the kid, but I did see something else." Miller leaned in. Dale claimed that around 10 p.m., he glanced out his window and saw headlights at the bottom of his long driveway. But then he saw another set of headlights pull up behind them. The first car, he assumed, was the pizza delivery, then drove away, followed by the second car. It was a new detail, a potential bombshell. But was it the truth, or a clever lie to cast suspicion elsewhere? Dale Hendricks' last-minute revelation about a second car sent a jolt through the stagnating investigation. It was the first new piece of information in weeks, a potential lead that could shift the entire focus of the case. Detective Miller was immediately skeptical. It was incredibly convenient that Dale, after multiple interviews, would suddenly remember such a crucial detail. It felt like a calculated move, a classic tactic to deflect blame and point the finger of suspicion in a new, unknown direction. Miller's gut screamed that it was a lie, but his duty as an investigator demanded he pursue it. He pressed Dale for more details. What kind of car was it? Did he get a license plate? A description of the driver? Dale's answers were frustratingly vague. "It was dark, raining hard," he said, his anger replaced by a feigned helpfulness. "Looked like a dark-colored sedan, maybe a Ford or a Chevy. That's all I saw." The whole thing lasted maybe a minute. Leo's car pulls up, this other car pulls in behind him, and then they both just drive off. "I figured he was meeting a friend or something and ditched my delivery." The story was plausible enough to be infuriating. The new lead, flimsy as it was, forced the police to re-examine the narrative. If Dale was telling the truth, then Leo wasn't abducted at his delivery location. Instead, he might have been intercepted at the entrance to the long driveway on Aspen Ridge Lane. Perhaps he knew the person in the second car. This opened up a whole new avenue of inquiry, one that led away from the strange handyman and back toward Leo's own life. Who would he have? met on a dark road in the middle of a storm. Miller's team dove back into Leo's social circle. They re-interviewed his roommate Josh, his friends from the university, and his co-workers. They were looking for anyone who drove a dark sedan, anyone who had a secret, a grudge, or a reason to meet Leo in such a clandestine manner. They scrutinized his phone records from the weeks leading up to his disappearance, searching for unusual calls or text messages. The process was exhausting. A search for a needle in a haystack when they weren't even sure if the needle existed. The investigation unearthed a minor point of friction in Leo's otherwise peaceful life. A few weeks before he vanished, Leo had started casually seeing a fellow student, a girl named Chloe. Chloe had recently broken up with her long-term boyfriend, a notoriously jealous and hot-tempered business major named Kyle. Friends reported that Kyle had confronted Leo in the university library a week before his disappearance, warning him to stay away from Chloe. The altercation was verbal, not physical, but it was a concrete lead, and Kyle, as it turned out, drove a dark blue Ford Fusion. Kyle was brought in for questioning. He was arrogant and defensive, his initial reaction a mix of bluster and denial. He admitted to confronting Leo, claiming he was just looking out for Chloe and that the conversation was a minor disagreement. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of October 26th, he claimed he was at a friend's house studying for midterm. Several of his friends backed up his alibi, creating a frustrating wall of corroboration that felt just a little too practiced, a little too perfect. The focus on Kyle provided a temporary, hopeful surge for the Martinez family. An expert with a temper seemed like a far more likely culprit than a random, creepy handyman. It was a tangible thread, a face they could associate with their pain. Maria found herself studying Kyle's picture in the local news, searching his eyes for the same emptiness she saw in Dale Hendrix's. But the hope was a fragile thing, easily broken. Without a confession or a crack in his alibi, Kyle remained just another person of interest. Detectives spent a week trying to dismantle Kyle's alibi. They interviewed his friends separately, hoping to find inconsistencies in their stories. They checked cell tower data to see if his phone pinged anywhere, near Aspen Ridge Lane or the logging road where Leo's car was found, but the alibi held firm and the cell data was inconclusive. Placing his phone in the general vicinity of his friend's apartment near the university campus, the dark blue Ford Fusion was searched, revealing nothing of evidentiary value. The lead was quickly turning into another dead end. The failure to connect Kyle to the disappearance seemed to validate Dale Hendrix's story, lending credence to the idea that he was just an innocent, if odd, bystander. The investigation had come full circle, leaving Detective Miller back where he started, with two potential suspects and no evidence to tie either of them to the crime. The case grew colder with each passing day. The missing posters began to tear and peel in the relentless Oregon rain, their ink bleeding like tears down Leo's smiling face. The second car, once a promising lead, had become just another ghost on a road full of them. Years began to pass. Detective Miller retired, the Martinez case being the one great regret of his career. The file, thick with dead-end leads and unanswered questions, was boxed up and moved to the cold case unit, a dusty archive of failure. Leo's friends graduated from university and moved on with their lives, the sharp pain of his loss softening into a dull, permanent ache. For Maria and Hector, however, time did not heal. It only deepened the wound, stretching the single night of his disappearance into an endless, agonizing eternity. The world kept spinning, but theirs had stopped on October 26, 2012, waiting for an answer that would not come for 13 long years. The years that followed were a quiet, grinding torment for the Martinez family. The initial flurry of activity, the hope that fueled the searches and vigils, slowly evaporated, leaving behind a heavy residue of grief. The case file, once active on a detective's desk, was relegated to a cold case locker, a silent testament to a puzzle no one could solve. Eagle Creek moved on, as towns do. New students arrived at the university, new businesses opened, and the story of the missing pizza delivery boy faded from public consciousness into local folklore, a cautionary tale told to incoming freshmen. Maria Martinez refused to let her son be forgotten. Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, she and Hector would stand on the steps of the police department and hold a small vigil. They would speak to any reporter who would listen, their voices growing frailer with each passing year, but their message remained the same. "We are still here. We are still waiting. Please don't forget, Leo." The crowds grew smaller over time, from a supportive gathering of hundreds to just a handful of loyal friends and family. Their flickering candles a small defiance against the encroaching darkness. Of the years, Detective Miller, now retired, lived with the ghost of Leo Martinez. He spent his days fishing on the Clackamas River, but his mind would often drift back to the case. He'd replay the interviews with Dale Hendricks, turning over the man's flat-eyed stare and convenient story in his memory. He'd think about Kyle, the arrogant ex-boyfriend, and wonder if his team had missed something. The lack of resolution gnawed at him, a professional failure that felt deeply personal. He kept a small, faded copy of Leo's missing poster tucked into the visor of his truck, a constant, silent reminder of the boy he couldn't bring home. Life moved on for the other figures in the case. Dale Hendricks, the man at the center of it all, moved away from Eagle Creek about a year after the disappearance. He left no forwarding address, simply packing up his belongings and vanishing as quietly as he had lived there. His departure left a permanent question mark over the investigation. Was it the act of an innocent man tired of the suspicion, or a guilty man escaping the scene of his crime? Without any evidence, his name remained just a name in a cold, dormant file. Kyle, the ex-boyfriend, graduated with his business degree and moved to California. He became a successful sales executive, got married, and had children. The dark cloud of the investigation seemed to have passed over him without leaving a permanent mark, at least on the surface. To the outside world, he was a success story. But for those who remembered the case, his name would always carry a faint shadow of doubt, a what-if, that lingered in the quiet corners of the town's collective memory. The dark sedan he drove was long gone, sold years ago. 13 years is a lifetime. Technology evolved in ways that seemed like science fiction back in 2012. DNA analysis became more sensitive, digital forensics more powerful, but these advancements were useless without new evidence to analyze. The case of Leo Martinez sat dormant, a relic of a different era of investigation. For a new generation of detectives at the Eagle Creek Police Department, it was a file they read about during their training, a local mystery with no solution, a cautionary tale about the ones that get away. The year is 2025. The world is a different place. Leo's bedroom in the Martinez home is still the same, but now it feels like a museum exhibit from a bygone era. The posters on the wall are for movies and bands that are now considered classic rock. His chunky laptop on the desk is an antique. Maria, now in her late 60s, moves slower, her face a roadmap of her long and painful journey. Her hope, once a burning fire, has dwindled to a single, stubborn ember, a flicker of light she protects against the winds of despair. On a bright, unusually sunny June afternoon in 2025, a woman named Alice is browsing in a downtown Eagle Creek thrift store, the Second Chance Boutique. She's looking for old books, drawn to the smell of aged paper and the promise of a story with a history. She picks up a thick, hardbound copy of a John Grisham novel from the dusty bin. It feels heavy in her hands. She idly flips through the pages, the way one does, checking for inscriptions or forgotten bookmarks. Tucked deep within the pages of the book, near the spine, is a small folded piece of paper. It's thin and fragile, yellowed with age. Alice carefully unfolds it. It's a receipt, the thermal paper so faded that the text is barely visible, like a ghost of a transaction. She can just make out the logo at the top, Pioneer Pizza. Below it, a date is faintly legible, October 26, 2012. It's an insignificant piece of trash, a relic that should have been discarded over a decade ago. Most people would have crumpled it up and thrown it away without a second thought. But Alice doesn't throw it away. As a longtime resident of Eagle Creek, she remembers the story of the missing pizza boy. The date, October 26, 2012, triggers a distant but powerful memory. A chill runs down her spine that has nothing to do with the store's air conditioning. She turns the fragile receipt over in her hand. On the back, almost completely faded, is what looks like a handwritten scroll, a few words and a sequence of numbers written in hurried, messy blue ink. She can't quite make it out, but she knows, with a certainty that settles deep in her bones, that this is important. This cold, forgotten piece of paper is a piece of the puzzle. Detective Isabella Rossi was the head of the Eagle Creek Police Department's cold case unit, a position that was often more archivist than investigator. She was sharp, empathetic, and had a deep respect for the history contained within the dozens of file boxes that lined her small office. She was only a teenager herself when Leo Martinez disappeared, but she knew the case intimately. It was the town's most infamous unsolved mystery, a story that had shaped her decision to become a detective. When Alice walked into the station, holding the delicate yellowed receipt in a plastic sandwich bag, Rossi felt the familiar electric hum of possibility. Rossi laid the receipt on a clean evidence cloth on her desk, handling it with the care of a museum curator. Under the bright, sterile light of her desk lamp, the fading was severe. The Pioneer Pizza logo was clear enough, as was the date. The items listed were one large pepperoni pizza and a soda, a perfect match to Leo's last order. It was, without a doubt, the receipt from his final, fateful delivery. For 13 years, this tiny slip of paper had been sleeping, waiting in the dark pages of a book, a silent witness to a crime everyone else had forgotten how to solve. The thrift store owner was interviewed immediately. The book, he explained, had come from a recent donation. It was part of a large estate cleanout from a storage facility on the outskirts of town. A specific unit, number 314, had gone to auction after the renter, a man, now 5 years deceased, had his payments lapse. The winner of the auction had sorted through the contents, keeping a few items and donating the rest, including boxes of old books, to the Second Chance Boutique. This was the first link in a chain of custody that stretched back years. Detective Rossi's first call was to a man who understood the weight of this discovery better than anyone. She found retired Detective Frank Miller's number and called him at his home by the river. At first, he was quiet on the other end of the line, the sound of the rushing water in the background. As Rossi explained the discovery of the receipt, a spark ignited in the old detective's voice. "The receipt for the delivery?" he asked, his voice thick with a mix of disbelief and renewed energy. After all this time, he agreed to come to the station immediately, the ghost of Leo Martinez pulling him back from his quiet retirement. The real challenge lay on the back of the receipt. The handwritten note was tantalizingly close to being illegible. The ink had faded and bled into the thermal paper over the years, leaving a faint, ghostly blue impression. To the naked eye, it was just a meaningless scrawl. Rossi knew that any conventional attempt to analyze it could destroy the fragile evidence completely. This was a job for the Oregon State Police Crime Lab, with its advanced forensic imaging technology. She carefully packaged the receipt, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was their one shot, while the receipt was being transported to the lab in Portland. Rossi and Miller sat in the cold case office, the thick binder for the Martinez case open between them. Miller, his eyes scanning the old reports, looked like he'd aged 10 years and shed 10 years all at once. He recounted the dead ends, the frustration with Dale Hendricks, the suspicions about Kyle. "We were missing something," Miller said, tapping a finger on Dale's original interview transcript. "Something right in front of our faces. We just couldn't see it." The story of the resurfaced receipt gave Maria and Hector Martinez the first glimmer of genuine hope they had felt in over a decade. Detective Rossi visited them personally, sitting with them in their quiet living room, explaining the new development. Maria cried, not from grief this time, but from a complex storm of hope, fear, and overwhelming emotion. To think that a clue to her son's fate had been lying dormant just a few miles away was both a miracle and a special kind of cruelty. The waiting, she knew, was about to begin all over again. The OSP Crime Lab technicians were intrigued by the challenge. They used a sophisticated video spectral comparator, a machine that uses different light wavelengths and filters to enhance writing that is invisible to the naked eye. They bombarded the back of the receipt with infrared and ultraviolet light, capturing high-resolution digital images. Slowly, painstakingly, as they adjusted the filters and layered the images, the faint blue scroll on the back of the paper began to resolve on their computer monitor. Like a spirit emerging from the fog, Detective Rossi's phone rang late the next afternoon. It was the lead forensic examiner from the state lab. "You're not going to believe this," the examiner said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "We got something. It's not perfect, but it's clear enough." She explained that the handwriting was rushed and messy, likely jotted down quickly inside. A dark car. It wasn't a confession or a name, not directly. It was something far more cryptic, something that would have been meaningless to anyone in 2012. The examiner emailed the enhanced image. Rossi and Miller huddled over the computer screen, The note, now clear as day, seemed to have been written by Leo himself. It contained 2 short lines. The first was a partial license plate says Subitres. The second line, written just below it, was a simple, chilling phrase, "Not customer," followed from shop. The receipt wasn't just a proof of purchase. It was Leo's final message, a desperate attempt to document the danger he was in. He knew the car behind him wasn't a friend. He knew the person who intercepted him wasn't Dale Hendricks. He was being hunted. Leo's final scribbled message from beyond the grave changed everything. "Not customer," followed from shop. These 6 words completely dismantled the primary theory of the 2012 investigation. It exonerated Dale Hendricks, confirming his bizarre story about a second car. More importantly, it confirmed that the threat to Leo did not originate on the secluded Aspen Ridge Lane, but likely began in the very parking lot of Pioneer Pizza. The perpetrator had targeted Leo, specifically, and had trailed him from the moment he left for his delivery. The crime was more calculated and more personal than anyone had ever imagined. The partial license plate, 6V3, was the key. In 2012, running a partial plate search would have yielded hundreds, if not thousands, of potential matches across the state, a logistical nightmare. But in 2025, with vastly improved databases and search algorithms, Detective Rossi could narrow the parameters. She ran the partial plate against vehicles registered in the Eagle Creek area in 2012, specifically looking for dark-colored sedans, just as Dale Hendricks had described. The system cross-referenced the results, spitting out a manageable list of 27 potential vehicles. Rossi and her small team began the painstaking work of investigating each vehicle on the list. Many had been sold, scrapped, or belonged to individuals who were quickly ruled out. But one entry stood out, a 2004 dark green Ford Taurus. Its full license plate was 6V3L7A. The car was registered to a man named Thomas Warren, and when Rossi ran his name through the system, a cascade of information began to connect the disparate threads of the case. Thomas Warren was the deceased renter of Storage Unit 314, the very place where the book containing the receipt had been found. Suddenly, they had a name and a face. Thomas Warren. Who was he? He was never on Miller's radar back in 2012. He wasn't a friend of Leo's, not connected to the university, not a known criminal in the area. A background check revealed a quiet, solitary life. He was 55 years old in 2012, working as a janitor for a commercial cleaning company that serviced various businesses in the Eagle Creek area. He had no family in Oregon, no close friends that anyone could name. He was, by all accounts, a man who moved through life like a shadow. Detective Rossi pulled up Warren's old employment records. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the client list for his cleaning company in October 2012. One of their regular nightly contracts was a small commercial plaza on the east side of town. The anchor tenant of that plaza was Pioneer Pizza. Thomas Warren, the quiet janitor, had been cleaning the floors and emptying the trash at Leo's workplace for months, a ghost in the background of the nightly hustle, observing the routines of the staff, including the young, friendly delivery driver. The next step was to find out everything they could about Warren's life and, more importantly, his death. Medical records showed he died of a massive heart attack in 2020. At the age of 63, he died alone in his small rental apartment, his body not discovered for several days. His few possessions were eventually moved to the storage unit by his landlord to clear out the apartment when no next of kin could be located to claim the items or pay the bill. The unit, number 314, eventually went to auction. It was a chain of lonely events that had inadvertently preserved the one clue that could solve the case. Retired Detective Miller, sitting with Rossi in her office, felt a profound sense of awe and frustration. He was right there, Miller muttered, staring at Warren's DMV photo. He was in the background the whole time. We were so focused on the customer and the ex-boyfriend, we never thought to look at the people who were just there. The new information painted a chilling picture, a reclusive older man, observing Leo, learning his schedule, and for some unknown reason, deciding to follow him on that rainy Friday night. Rossi and Miller decided to revisit the original case file, looking at every witness statement through the new lens of Thomas Warren. They reread the transcript of an interview with one of Leo's co-workers, a dishwasher who was on a smoke break. When Leo left for his final delivery, The dishwasher had mentioned seeing one of the janitors hanging around the back door, near the dumpsters. At the time, the detail was dismissed as irrelevant. The janitor was always there. It was his job. No one had bothered to get his name. The motive was still a complete mystery. Why would a 55-year-old janitor abduct and kill a 20-year-old pizza delivery boy? It didn't seem to be a robbery, as Leo's wallet and a small amount of cash were found in his abandoned car. Was it a crime of opportunity, a personal grudge, a darker, more disturbing obsession? Since Warren was dead, a direct answer was impossible. The truth would have to be excavated from the remnants of his solitary life. The investigation now had a singular, urgent focus. Find out what was in the rest of Thomas Warren's auctioned-off belongings. Rossi put out a call to the public, seeking information from the man who had bought the contents of storage unit 314. They needed to find what else Warren had hidden away. They had a suspect, a timeline, and a location. Now, they needed to find the final piece of the puzzle, Leo himself. The ghost on the thermal paper had given them a name, and now that name was leading them into the dark, silent world of a man who had died with a terrible secret. The public appeal for the buyer of storage, Unit 314's contents, worked faster than Rossi had anticipated. A man named George Finley, a local scrap metal dealer and flea market enthusiast, contacted the station. He confirmed he had bought the unit 5 years ago. He described it as mostly junk, old furniture, boxes of clothes, and dozens of containers, filled with books and magazines. He had sold what he could, donated the books, and thrown the rest away. The memory was hazy, but he agreed to help in any way he could. Detective Rossi and a small team met George at his cluttered property on the edge of town. It was a sprawling yard filled with rusted metal, old appliances, and the ghosts of other people's lives. George, a gruff but cooperative man, led them to a weathered shed in the back. "I kept a few of the guy's personal boxes," he explained, pulling a dusty tarp off a stack of plastic totes. "Things that felt a bit weird to sell. Photo albums, papers, that sort of thing. Figured maybe family would turn up one day." Inside these totes lay the last remnants of Thomas Warren's private world. They spent the rest of the day carefully sifting through the contents of the totes. It was a profoundly sad task, cataloging the life of a man who seemed to have no one. There were old, faded photographs of people who were not identified, souvenirs from places he might have visited, and meticulous records of his own finances. Warren was frugal, almost obsessively so, saving nearly every penny he earned from his janitorial work. He had amassed a surprising amount of cash, which was nowhere to be found among these belongings. In one of the photo albums, tucked behind a picture of a generic waterfall, they found something that made Detective Rossi's breath catch in her throat. It was a small, candid snapshot, slightly out of focus. The picture was of Leo Martinez. He was standing outside Pioneer Pizza, laughing, with a co-worker, completely unaware he was being photographed. The photo was taken from a distance, likely with a zoom lens. It was the photo of a stalker, an artifact of a one-sided secret obsession. This discovery shifted the motive from unknown to deeply disturbing. Warren hadn't just noticed Leo. He had been actively watching him. But why? They found no diaries, no letters, nothing to explain the why. Miller, looking at the photo, theorized it might not have been a malicious obsession, but a twisted, paternal one. Warren was a loner, no family of his own. Maybe, Miller said quietly, he saw a kid who had everything he didn't: youth, friends, a future, and he wanted to possess it or destroy it. The most significant find came from a box of old work uniforms. At the bottom, folded neatly, was a dark green, heavy-duty work jacket. It was a common brand, nothing special on its own, but Rossi immediately cross-referenced it with the original 2012 witness files. There, buried deep in the supplementary reports, was a statement from a transient who had been sheltering under a bridge that night. He claimed to have seen a dark sedan pull onto the logging road, followed by a man in a green jacket getting out. His statement was dismissed at the time. He was intoxicated and considered an unreliable witness. The discovery of the jacket provided crucial corroboration for a witness who had been ignored for 13 years. The pieces were now snapping into place with alarming speed. Thomas Warren, the janitor, wearing his green work jacket, followed Leo from the pizzeria in his dark green Ford Taurus. He intercepted Leo on Aspen Ridge Lane, somehow convinced, or forced him to drive to the remote logging road. And then, what? The final act of the tragedy was still shrouded in the forest's darkness. The team's focus now turned to Warren's final residence, the apartment where he had died 5 years earlier. It had been rented out to new tenants since then, but Rossi secured a warrant to search the property once more, this time with a specific goal. They weren't looking for personal effects. They were looking for structural changes, for anything that might indicate a hidden space or a recent disturbance. They brought in cadaver dogs, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. Even years after the fact, the dogs swept the small apartment and the surrounding grounds. They showed some interest in a closet, but nothing definitive. The current tenants were cooperative, though clearly unnerved by the police presence. The search of the apartment itself proved to be another dead end. As the day wore on, a sense of frustration began to creep back in. They had the man, they had the motive, they had the timeline, but they still didn't have the victim. They were missing the final, most important piece of evidence. Just as they were about to pack up, one of the dogs, a German shepherd named Odin, began to bark insistently at a small, concrete patio at the back of the ground floor apartment. Patio was small, barely big enough for a chair and a grill. It looked like it had been there for decades, but Odin would not relent, scratching at the edge of the concrete slab where it met the soft, damp earth of the yard. The handler looked at Rossi, a grim understanding in his eyes. The only way to know for sure was to look underneath. The janitor's ghost had led them to his backyard, and now they had to break ground to uncover his secret. The decision to excavate the concrete patio behind Thomas Warren's old apartment was a significant one. It required breaking through a thick slab of concrete poured years ago, a physically demanding and legally complicated process. Detective Rossi had to secure a new, more specific warrant, presenting her evidence to a judge. The receipt, the license plate, the photo of Leo, the jacket, and the insistent alert from the cadaver dog. The chain of evidence was strong, and the warrant was granted. The quiet apartment complex was about to become the center of a media storm. The morning of the excavation was gray and overcast. The sky, a familiar Oregon shade of steel. Police tape cordoned off the area, keeping a growing crowd of reporters and curious onlookers at a distance. The Martinez family was there, standing with Detective Miller, their faces a mixture of dread and desperate hope. For 13 years, they had lived with the uncertainty. Now, they stood on the precipice of a terrible certainty, a truth that could be both a release and a final, devastating blow. Maria clutched Hector's hand, her knuckles white. The forensic team brought in jackhammers and ground-penetrating radar. The radar scan was performed first, its waves penetrating the earth beneath the concrete. The technician stared intently at his monitor, watching the lines and shadows that represented different densities underground. Then, he stopped, pointing to a specific area near the center of the patio. "We have a significant anomaly here," he said, his voice low and professional. "The soil density is inconsistent. It's been disturbed, and there's an object ... about 5 feet down. Asterisk. The sound of the jackhammer shattered the morning's quiet. The heavy machine pounded against the concrete, sending spiderwebs of cracks across the surface. The work was slow and methodical, each strike a punctuation mark in the long sentence of the Martinez family's suffering. Chunks of concrete were lifted away, revealing the dark, damp soil beneath. The air filled with the smell of dust and wet earth. The cadaver dog, Odin, whined softly, his instincts now confirmed by the machinery. But once the concrete was removed, the team switched from heavy machinery to hand tools. They began to dig carefully, scraping away layers of soil with shovels and trowels, like archaeologists unearthing a lost civilization. The hole grew deeper, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4. The tension was unbearable. Every scrape of a shovel could be the one that revealed the unthinkable. Detective Rossi stood at the edge, watching, her expression a mask of professional calm that betrayed none of the turmoil she felt inside. At a depth of just over 5 feet, a forensic anthropologist who was assisting the team called out, "Stop." He knelt at the edge of the hole, pointing with his trowel. A small piece of blue fabric was visible, peeking out from the dirt. It was denim. Carefully, using brushes, he cleared more soil away. The fabric was part of a pair of jeans, and then, a moment later, the unmistakable, pale curve of a bone. A collective gasp went through the law enforcement personnel standing by. There was no more doubt. The excavation became even more delicate. Over the next several hours, the team uncovered a full human skeleton. The remains were carefully unearthed, each bone's position meticulously documented and photographed before being removed. Along with the skeletal remains, they found other items buried in the makeshift grave: a wallet, its leather preserved by the cool, damp earth, a set of car keys, and a Pioneer pizza hat, its red logo faded but still recognizable. It was the final, heartbreaking confirmation. Inside the preserved wallet, a university ID card was found. The photo was laminated, protected from the elements. The smiling face of a 20-year-old boy stared up at the gray sky. It was Leo Martinez. After 13 years of silence, 13 years of searching and waiting, he had finally been found. Detective Rossi walked over to Maria and Hector. She didn't have to say a word. They saw the truth in her eyes. Maria let out a sound that was half sob, half sigh. The sound of a mother's worst fear realized, and her longest prayer answered all at once. The subsequent autopsy and forensic analysis of the remains would tell the story of Leo's final moments. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the back of the head. There were no other signs of a prolonged struggle. The theory the investigators pieced together was brutal and swift. Warren had somehow lured Leo out of his car on the logging road, perhaps under a pretense of car trouble, and struck him from behind. He had then transported Leo's body back to his apartment and buried him under the cover of darkness and the raging storm, later pouring the concrete patio to permanently seal his crime. The why would forever be locked in the silence of Thomas Warren's grave. But the how and the who were now known. The discovery brought a grim closure to the town of Eagle Creek and its most haunting cold case. The case wasn't solved by a brilliant detective or a deathbed confession. It was solved by a series of mundane events: a storage unit auction, a thrift store donation, and a single faded receipt that refused to let a forgotten boy's last message disappear forever. The concrete was broken, and with it, 13 years of silence. The news that Leo Martinez had been found brought a strange, heavy peace to the town of Eagle Creek. The resolution of the 13-year-old mystery was a collective exhalation of breath. The community didn't realize it had been holding. The story was a sobering reminder that the ghosts of the past are sometimes buried just beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to speak. For a generation that had grown up with the cautionary tale of the missing pizza boy, the truth was both a relief and a profound sorrow. A memorial service was held on the university campus, under the same tall fir trees that had once hidden so many secrets. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects, from Leo's childhood friends to strangers who had been touched by his story. His old roommate, Josh, now a man in his 30s, spoke of Leo's infectious laugh and his unwavering loyalty. The portrait that emerged was not of a victim, but of a vibrant, beloved young man whose light had been extinguished far too soon, but was never forgotten. For Maria and Hector Martinez, the confirmation of their son's death was the final chapter. In a book of pain they had been forced to read for 13 years, the discovery brought an end to the agonizing torture of uncertainty. They could finally bring their son home. In a private ceremony, they laid him to rest in the local cemetery, under a simple headstone engraved with his name, the dates of his short life, and the words, Amadou, Hijo, beloved son. The terrible waiting was over, leaving only grief, which, in its own way, felt like a mercy. Detective Rossi and a retired Frank Miller stood together at the edge of the cemetery during the burial, a quiet passing of the torch. For Miller, it was the closing of a painful wound in his career, a final salute to the boy he could never find. For Rossi, it was a testament to the power of methodical, persistent police work. Their collaboration, blending Miller's old instincts with her team's modern forensic capabilities, had bridged the 13-year gap and delivered the justice that had for so long seemed impossible. The district attorney's office officially closed the Leo Martinez case, posthumously naming Thomas Warren as his killer. The investigation into his life painted a portrait of extreme isolation and resentment. While a clear motive would never be fully known, the evidence, the stalker-like photograph, the hidden jacket, the careful burial pointed toward a crime of obsessive possession. He saw in Leo a life he could never have, and chose to shatter it. A final, terrible act of control by a man who had none in his own life. The other figures from 2012 were finally released from the story's grip. Dale Hendricks, tracked down and informed of the news, wept with relief. The cloud of suspicion that had followed him for years, costing him jobs and relationships, had finally lifted. Kyle, the former boyfriend, also expressed his sorrow for the Martinez family and his relief that the truth was known. They were footnotes in Leo's story. Men who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their lives forever entangled in a crime they did not commit. The legend of the cold receipt became a symbol of hope for other families. Of the missing, it was a powerful reminder that evidence can survive for years, that truth can hide in the most mundane of objects. Alice, the woman who found the receipt, remained a quiet hero, asking for no recognition. Her simple act of curiosity and civic duty had been the catalyst for everything. The first domino to fall in a chain that led from a dusty book in a thrift store to a shallow grave under a concrete patio. The forensic team provided the last heartbreaking details. The autopsy confirmed the swiftness of the attack. Buried with Leo was his wallet, containing $37 in tip money. Financial records showed that in the weeks after the murder, Thomas Warren, a man who never spent a dime, began making small, frivolous purchases. It was a pathetic, secondary motive of robbery, a final insult to the life he had taken. He had funded his sad, small comforts with the last earnings of the boy he had killed. In the end, peace for the Martinez family was a quiet, private thing. Maria no longer kept Leo's room as a perfect shrine. She began to pack his things, not to erase him, but to hold his memory in her heart instead of in a dusty room. She would visit his grave, speaking to him not with the desperation of a mother searching for a lost child, but with the calm of a mother who knows where her son is, resting. The silence in her house was different now. It was no longer the sound of absence, but the sound of peace. The story of Leo Martinez concluded not with a dramatic courtroom confession, but with the quiet dignity of a headstone in a cemetery. It was a testament to the enduring love of a family that refused to give up and the strange, unpredictable path that justice sometimes takes. It proved that even after 13 years of silence, a single, faded piece of paper, holding the last words of a boy driving into the night, could be loud enough to break through concrete and finally bring a lost soul home.